Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our first 7-minute Sizzle of the semester. If you didn't get a chance to do the sign-in sheet, we'll put it up again at the very end, or you can see the link that Ashley posted in the chat window there. That'll take you to the same place. But today we have Dr. Christine James, who is a professor of philosophy with us. And she's going to be presenting some helpful strategies and tips on helping students find those resources for research papers or essays, and some paper grading tips as well. So with that said, Dr. James, I'm going to let you take it away.
Hi, everybody. Are you able to hear me? Yay, wonderful. I'm Christine James, and I've been teaching with eCourse since about 2004, and I've loved it the whole time, and I love working with everybody on the eCourse staff. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to share some information with you. Today, I thought it would be a good time of the semester to work with the idea of how to help students doing research on papers, because some of our courses will actually try to emphasize the idea that students should do some outside research for their papers, especially since they have such handy access to services like Galileo. And then I also thought that I would put in some information about helping people to manage their grading time. So over the course of this PowerPoint presentation, you'll see lots of different tips, lots of different information that might be helpful for you. One of the things that I think is very helpful for students in planning writing papers, and this is useful even if you've now had one paper due in your class, but there's going to be another one coming up at the end that might need to be a little bit stronger. Here's some tips that you can give that might end up helping with that second paper writing process. It's a really good idea to have students understanding some way of doing an outline of a paper so that writing the whole paper all at once won't be too intimidating for them. I like to try and have a 4-part paper so that I can tell students to try and divide up their writing into quarters. And then I try and have them do a lot of research about the primary sources in philosophy that they have to write about. And I emphasize that they should do some kind of a literature review. They should look at the primary sources first and then try to find people who have discussed those primary sources. And one of the things that we can notice is that students will actually do that kind of a process if you tell them about it and explain to them how to do it, just in case it's their first time. You know, with more and more students in eCore coming from high school, dual enrollment programs, or people who are returning to college after having been away for a while, they may just not be aware of what some of those services are and how much they can actually add to their paper. So the other things that I would mention would be using grading rubrics and letting the students know about it. Have it be a public grading rubric so that they can actually feel like they are earning points with some of the specific things that they do. One of the things that I like to do is have a PowerPoint that explains to the students how to go about doing research using an example that's not exactly from anything that they would write about in the class, but that is something that would be similar, so that they could find an example of, oh, here's the things you might find. So when you see some of these slides with the word sample, that's actually a sample of a slide that I would actually show the students themselves. Many times students will start out with a general Google search, especially if their own writing background coming out of high school emphasized something like a 5-paragraph essay. They might be thinking, well, I can just look on Google for it. Then you kind of have to give them a little bit of coaching about what they're going to find and whether or not it will actually be a decent source. So in this case, I have this imaginary topic about writing about God and Dante's Inferno and the Divine Comedy. And that's actually something that people in religious studies would really discuss. So if they do a Google search, they might find something like this. And it looks really interesting, but if you take a close look at it, it's a website that's basically a blog, and it's being written from a particular area of interest. It's someone's particular religious beliefs. It has a statement of faith. These would all be signs that it's not an academic source, and it's not peer-reviewed by other academics. It's certainly fine for people to look at and read, but it wouldn't necessarily be the kind of thing that I would want them to cite in a paper. Then you will have students who will look on YouTube, especially if they feel not very confident in their own reading skills. They might actually find something like this, which is a lecture that was done by a professor in the UK at the University of Leeds, and he's actually someone lecturing at Ireland, and it's something that students really could cite. At that particular point, I would be happy for them to cite this as a podcast, to cite it as an online source. You'll end up noticing that there's actually ways in which you can use YouTube to get the URL and the time at which someone says something. So if they are actually giving a quote, it would be a really good idea to give them a little bit of a tip about how to cite a podcast. And there's lots of different tools for that, including the Purdue OWL website, their online writing center. It'll tell you what MLA, what APA would be for citing of this kind of a lecture that's available online. So you never know. If that's something that you're willing to have students use in a paper, it could actually be very valuable, and it adds to the multimedia content of your class. This is another curious example. It's from an article in the Wall Street Journal about Dante and the Divine Comedy, and it really has an interesting theory. It's not going to be considered a peer-reviewed academic source, but it might actually open the door for the students to be thinking about things in an interesting way. You might decide that it's okay for them to cite something like this. I usually, depending on the level of the class, I might encourage the students to look at a scholar who is referenced in an article like this. It's very similar to how I feel about Wikipedia. I don't like it when students are citing Wikipedia, but I do actually think that there are some Wikipedia pages that are well researched, and if they look at the bottom sources on the Wikipedia page, it might open the door for them to find some really good sources for their paper. Now, the place where I'm really trying to steer the students, the punchline, is to try and have the students go to Galileo and get started using peer-reviewed sources. I make sure that I do screen captures like you see at the bottom of this slide to help the students understand exactly how easy it is to go to Galileo from wherever they are. And I explain to them what Gil Express means, that if you find a peer-reviewed article that's not available for you in full text automatically, you are welcome as an eCourse student to use Interlibrary Loan too. It just takes a bit longer. So then the next thing that I'll do is go into some discussions about how Galileo actually works. And I want to share with you from some of my friends who have been involved in Galileo over the years with our library here at VSU and with eCore. There's actually a really nice video that they put together to celebrate Galileo's 20th anniversary. And it's really a nice video to watch. There's some interesting moments where they talk about how Galileo has grown up with the current actual generation of college students that we have because it's 20 years old. So if you have a chance and you want to take a look at it on YouTube, it's really fun. When they open up eCore's website about how to go to Galileo, there's this great page, and I actually screen cap this page and I give them the link multiple times so that they will feel comfortable knowing that Galileo and eCore work well together. And then I try to explain something to them about what the different databases are within Galileo. The databases that are available actually have different personalities and different emphases. If they do a general Discover search first, they probably will find some good items. They'll just need to make sure that it's peer-reviewed. They could also decide to go under databases. If they go to databases like Academic Search Complete under A, then that's going to be a nice broad interdisciplinary search. So if there's a psychologist writing about Dante's Inferno and a philosopher and a theologian, they'll find a lot of different academic disciplines in Academic Search Complete. If they wanted to go into something that's historical, where there's people who have written about it as a topic over the last 50 years, JSTOR, Journal Storage, under the letter J in databases is a really good source. It takes a little bit, of work to try and explain how those different databases work, but if you're willing to put together a PowerPoint or explain it to them in written form, it's really helpful. The other thing that I think is good for them to know about is that if they do find a source outside of Galileo, they can check to see if it's peer-reviewed under databases, under Ulrichs. Ulrichs is a service that checks the name of a journal. Like here we have some examples like Studies in Christian Ethics, the Journal of Religion, Modern Theology. These journals are all peer-reviewed, but if someone goes to a Google search or a Google Scholar search, there's actually some really interesting things that they might find which may or may not be included under Galileo. If that's the case, tell them that they should look at the name of that journal within the Ulrichs database under U. And then, if they look up that particular name of that particular journal, they're going to be able to see this little symbol, which looks like a black and white referee jersey for European football matches, and that's a sign that that is legitimately a peer-reviewed journal. So if you explain it and you show them a few examples, they're going to feel really empowered about what they can do for their own research. The next thing to take a look at, inside this PowerPoint, which I can make available to anybody who'd like it, there's a lot of different online videos to help students with preparing research presentations, posters, and abstracts. And if you show students examples of other students who have made a successful research paper, it actually can be very empowering and it can encourage them to do well with their own writing. So I included just a page of those links there for anybody who'd like them. The next thing that I want to talk about, though, were some tips about managing your time when you're grading papers. First of all, I would say you want to decide what view of papers you like to use the best when you grade. There's different ways of viewing a paper. You can click on the originality report. That's going to give you a lot of really good information about possible plagiarism and how the students have cited their sources. That can be a helpful way to look and grade. Then you could also decide to always use the downloaded Word documents that students have sent you. And at that point, it's really handy if you like to do markup comments on the student papers and return them. Some people do attach the graded paper with markup comments to the comment box within the Dropbox. You don't necessarily have to. You can decide to type up the comments in the Dropbox as your primary way of grading. That's up to you. But whichever one of these views is most sufficient for you, go ahead and use that. The next thing that you would just want to think about would be, how do you like to give feedback to students? If you have a grading rubric that you like to attach to the Dropbox, that's a great idea, especially if you've been giving the students a grading rubric with outlining tips as they started their writing process. That brings us full circle if they have that same grading rubric filled out to evaluate their paper. Another set of ideas that you might use in grading papers, it's a really good idea to think about how you're going to approach your grading. And then I also like the idea of grading student papers as they come in. I tend not to wait for them all to be in at the same time, just because there will be a lot of students in eCore who are actually willing to send in work early. That helps me to divide up my time and do grading over a certain number of days rather than having to do one long grading session in a marathon. When you end up grading papers, it's a good idea to save some of the most commonly used phrases that you would actually place within the comment box in a Word document and just keep it open next to where you are in GoView doing your grading. That way you can do a lot of copying and pasting instead of doing typing of the same phrases over and over again. You can also do that with markup comments when you grade papers and then reattach them to the students in the Dropbox. I also think it's handy to use a concept of thresholds when I grade, and I do this kind of with discussions and with papers. So for example, if there's a certain key term that I expect the student to explain, if the paper topic deals with a particular philosopher, usually there's a term that they have to explain and be able to show that they understand it when they write. If they don't mention that term, then I know that there's a certain grade threshold that they haven't gone above. And I think that it ends up being helpful to know exactly what kinds of things you're looking for in any student's paper. And at that point, it actually makes grading go a little bit more smoothly. So I also use a lot of the traditional eCore tips that we see and some of the memo of understanding tips that we have, like referring to the student by name. So I'll actually put their name in the Dropbox when I make the comments about their paper. I also am a big fan of the sandwich method, which means saying something positive about how they've written and then giving criticisms and then saying something kind again at the end. So I'm being critical, I'm giving them feedback, but I'm also letting them know that I'm really on their team and I'm willing to help them improve their writing. So here's just an example in italics of how I might do that for a particular student. Whenever I have a made-up student that I discuss, I usually use the name Tralfaz, which was the dog on the Jetsons cartoons. So I say, this is a very solid effort, Tralfaz, and I appreciate your use of our class readings as well as an outside source. However, I would like to see your description of Locke's theory of the self developed in more detail with his key terms. For example, could you add a section on the role of memory in Locke's theory of the self? I also noticed you had some grammar and spelling mistakes highlighted in the attached copy of your paper. I really enjoyed your use of your own personal example of gaining knowledge of how to synthesize bromide in chemistry class. I think that personal narrative adds a great deal to your argument for a self-based and empirical experiences. Well-written paper just needs more detail on certain philosophers. B. So those are the kinds of things that I would do, using their name and making sure that I was using that sandwich method of both positive and negative things to say. I hope that I didn't go too far over my 7-minute time. I apologize if I did, and if anyone has any questions, I am more than happy to take your questions. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful October. Oh, thanks. I see Ashley applauding. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Oh, thanks, Anna. Oh, sure. Absolutely, Ginger. I'd love to send that to you. I will do so. Oh, yes. I'll definitely send it, Anna. Thank you.
Okay, well, we may still have a few comments coming in there. Well, thank you very much for presenting that. There's definitely some very good tips in there. One thing I was going to ask you, if you're okay with it when we email out the link to the recording of today's session, if you're all right, I can just put your PowerPoint on there, and that way it'll go to everyone.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciated being able to do it this way. I know the last time I did a 7-minute sizzle, I think that I made a Camtasia voice over PowerPoint that we played in YouTube. But you're right, this was much more convenient. It's actually easier to do it in real time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, well, I'm going to go ahead and put our sign-in sheet back up. So if you came in a little bit late and didn't get a chance to sign in, it'll be on your screen in just a second.
Are we still recording? Should I turn off the recording?
Let's see. I'll go ahead and take care of that right now.